I just wanted to set that up now because we're already on YouTube. This is Exceptional Radio, and it's what is the date? It's the 22nd of December, 2019.
Officially winter.
It's officially winter.
But it's also like 50 degrees out, and it's going to be, I think, 60 degrees on Christmas Eve or some shit like that. Like, so on the one hand, climate change, but on the other hand, fuck yeah, t-shirts and shorts. I'm cool with that. Like, I mean, you gotta take your fucking wins when you can.
You know, it's been a weird past few days. The temperature has been like all over the place.
Yeah,
And then, yesterday was freezing, and then today it's like in the 50s.
yeah.
That's
Well, yesterday was 45, I think.
Oh yeah, towards the end of the
It got
day.
down to really cold overnight, but
Yeah, I think that's like the universe giving us like a good solstice.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Or the shift that was actually like that everybody assumed was happening in 2012 is actually happening now, which is funny. I think it's hilarious how many people banked all their shit on the Mayan 2012 quote unquote end of the world prediction when in real obviously it's not, but all those people still exist and didn't lose any of their credibility apparently. Like, people are still listening to those people. Like, they just drifted back into society as if they weren't freaking out and fucking doomsday prepping and telling everybody that the world was going to end because of some calendar that they magically understood, even though they didn't know the language that the Mayans actually spoke or wrote. And yeah, those people still exist, but we don't know where they are now because they're not doomsday prepping yet. There's no magical number that we can tie to an event that's like, oh, 2020, 21, 21. Maybe that's the next one. They'll say 12, 1, 21, 21, 21 or some shit that it comes like a magical sounding number that they
Well,
can then say is a doomsday event.
what's the next number that has a square root?
Is that how humans formulate the end of the world? They do it by square roots.
I
Then.
mean, might as well.
Oh, it was the human that invented the idea of the rapture, right? He got his New Testament readings out of a language, translated out of another language, translated
Yeah.
out of another language, and got his date incorrect, not once but twice.
Yeah, yeah.
That's like the dark helmet of languages.
I guess technically everybody's prediction's been wrong, right? Every single prediction's been wrong, not just those two. I mean, that's the beauty of this whole non-human centered universe, right?
It is something to witness for sure. The end of the world coming and going every few decades.
It's just like you hear a story about Bitcoin dying every month or two, and it's like, it's funny how much people want to have a beginning and ending is like finality and like the idea of something having continuous existence is something that is really hard for Westerners to fathom. They can't have the idea that something just exists. Like, when was it born? Well, what gender is it?
Oh, you mean like just everything like this idea that humans have, that things pop up out of a vacuum, that
I think just Westerners.
just Westerners.
I think tend to be Westerners.
That the idea that humans have come out of being hunter-gatherers, right, and then became agrarian. Is that the
Yeah.
proper human term, agrarian?
Very linear.
That they develop houses and domesticated animals, the wolf being first, and then livestock. But all of a sudden it was like, you talk to some humans, especially in the West, you're quite right about that. It's like, oh, they're all of a sudden, they're agricultural and they're civilized. Overnight. It's amazing.
And then we're finding out that the formation of society was very much a sinusoidal. If I don't, there's definitely not a linear existence or the way that human history unfolded was not in a linear curve of progression. It was definitely more, if not sinusoidal, it could be logarithmic at some points, and I guess it would be what parabolic in others. You know,
Is the latest thing that they're shifting? Maybe I read a human article about Australia maybe being ground zero for humanity instead of Africa.
Yeah, I
don't know what the science is on that though.
I mean, I think there is obviously there's a tendency to want to have a singular point of origin, in that obviously if there's seeds for life, it can happen in multiple places at once. So like that's why a bird, there's no single origin of a bird, which is why there's flightless birds, there's flighted birds, there's semi-flighted birds, there's all these different types of birds, because there's not a single. There'd be some scientists that would argue that there is a single ancestor, but I'd argue those scientists are wrong, because that's nearly impossible in the grand scheme of things, in that it's a matter of there are archetypes that emerge over time. So this is like the same argument as to where multiple cultures have pyramids. It's not that they all discovered the pyramid structure from the same individual or the same source. It's that over time there are structures that emerge that are
they discover mathematics on different timelines, right? And the engineering skills.
But in that timeline, there are formulas and structures that are more stable and more practical than others. So then that's a matter of, it's the same thing with evolution over time.
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Radio is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Castle in partnership with KLST 103.5, radiocalicity.org.
We're live.
Yeah. So today we have our guest Snark the Goblin on the Exceptional Randos.
Cheers.
And we're going to be discussing various aspects of humanity and culture, past and present, and most likely some future. Mainly because I think we've gotten wrapped up in as humans, we've tend to become too wrapped up in trying to discuss hot topics of the now and what's happening today, and in that those things are always delayed in a way that make us disconnected anyway, but there's this perception of being informed, let's call it. So this is kind of where...
Well, you can be informed, but the quality of information by which you become informed is a question.
Exactly.
Right?
But nobody's asking that question. So everybody wants to become an armchair expert immediately on any subject, whether it's politics, fucking physics, you name it. Anytime somebody reads a headline, they become an expert. They don't even have to read the whole fucking story anymore. And this is like one of the big problems in misleading headlines and quote-unquote fake news, is that people will read a headline. I know enough people at this point have been duped by misleading headlines that they're more apt to go and scan the article and read the last line to see if what the headline says is actually accurate. But there's this element of people want to be the first to spread information, and it's like this weird element of if I'm the first person to tell you about something, that gives me some sort of value. And it's like, in an increasingly informed society that is inundated with information, there's an element of trying to figure out what's important in the now. And that's also, I think, part of it is there's such a huge emphasis on trying to figure out like what's hot, what's gonna be viral, what's the next viral thing, that then it removes people from being able to analyze what's actually happened and be like understanding of what has actually elaborated in time.
Well,
there's too much emphasis on trying to figure out what's still happening right now.
That's a reflection of our competitive culture and the culture of first, and we value first more than anything, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that being first is actually the best thing anymore. We're at this point of diminishing returns where the information is so detailed. If you wait just a little bit longer, you can gather enough information about an event to be reasonably informed to the level of what journalism allows. But unless you're there, you're still just reading an account of something. And so it doesn't even matter who's first to find the article, because they're basically last to get to the scoop.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't even get to the scoop. They had to get it secondhand.
Does the scoop ever even matter anymore? And that's the weird.
That's the point. The diminishing return is that in rushing to get the scoop first, they could leave things out. There might not be enough time to do the background research. They might not be able to vet all of the information properly, and then next thing you know, the credibility of a media organization is called into question because we thought the name was what they said, but it was wrong.
Yeah.
And even something as innocuous as a name slip is enough to just bring a media research group's credibility down.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got like people in the gallery who are like ready, just like frothing at the mouth to celebrate the failure of an individual for slipping on a name.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, because then this is where I'm like looking at it in that things happen too fast for any of it to matter anymore. There's so much stuff happening at such a rapid pace that none of it matters at this point. And that's where I'm like, okay, at one point in time, everyone was worried about somebody getting nuked between us and North Korea. Somebody was going to get nuked. That was like 3 years ago.
To be fair to North Korea, right? What were they going to FedEx the bomb? Right? And you talk about the idea of research. Even us goblins saw from a distance. Okay, the Koreans are developing, well, specifically the North Koreans are developing a nuclear weapon. They don't have the means to deliver such a weapon. And I'm not telling you not to be afraid of the idea of a nuclear bomb. It's a quite frightening thing. But how are they exactly going to get it to the continental United States?
I think that everything that our media has presented us about the progress that North Korea has made into their missile program and their weapons program is to pacify concern about the rate of development that they've achieved.
Mm-hmm.
People don't really realize that North Korea has a version of Linux that's coded entirely in a foreign computer science or computer language. It's like based in Korean, which itself is a language that is extremely isolated. It has a lot of similarities to classical Chinese, but the diversion happened, 8,000 years ago or something like that. And so we're talking about a culture that can communicate in something so foreign that, by the time that we see what exactly the extent of their network, they'll already have a translator that translates their computer language with ours, and it'll be seamless. But we won't have that.
Their direction.
Yeah, we won't. It's not bi-directional. It's a one-way translation.
Right?
But here, okay, so in that isolation, though, it's not just cultural; it's also geographic, and this gets back to the whole bomb delivery system, which is also the reason we can't just bomb Iran.
Yeah. They live in a fortress.
There's this geographic separation that is hard for people to fathom because a lot of people in America have never left their own state, let alone flown across the expanse that is the fucking Atlantic Ocean. In that, like, the idea of trying to deliver a bomb that won't be shot down, it's pretty absurd unless you're using these rods of God or whatever the fuck.
Oh, the Patriot rods or whatever.
There's no. I don't think we have them yet.
The giant steel
Yeah,
rods are gonna drop.
the Russians have them. I don't know if we have them yet. The Russians have them working, and they're just, as far as I know. Well, obviously you don't. I don't know everything because I don't have.
The way the math works with these giant steel rods is that they reach terminal velocity some space, roughly 20 miles above the surface of the Earth, and by the time they hit the Earth, the impact force is sufficient to destroy everything within some range relative to the mass of the rod and the type of the density of the geography around it. So if they hit a city where there's potential for considerable, destruction by way of buildings, where we have large steel structures, entire infrastructures of metal, basically, these things will be superheated and potentially vaporize as they explode, projecting, liquid metal shrapnel vapor at the speed of sound.
You'll have to forgive my very old goblin brain. You're describing a kinetic energy weapon then?
Yes.
Just a straight kinetic energy
weapon. It's just a rod from space.
Wow. That's like a strange convention of human science fiction become a reality then, right?
Yeah.
That's quite frightening.
Well, but the issue is also it has to be over the target. So you can't just launch these things.
They don't have guidance systems.
Yeah, they can't use a guidance system.
There's, of course, an immense amount of variables to
exactly.
the projectile off course.
So it sounds a lot... The potential application of it takes a lot of coordination that with international restrictions, it's not going to be easy for Russians to get the satellite over anywhere besides their own testing shit.
This is also the reason for Space Force.
I mean, that's absolutely true. And the issue is...
You laugh, Snark, but
the issue is we've already had a Space Force. Americans are just finding out about it. That's like...
Where do I sign up for Space Force? Is there a
in the Air Force. It's actually in the Air Force. Like, this is getting back to the notion of feeling informed, because it's like we've had a Space Force for decades, but we're just now finding out about it as a public.
It's a sub-branch of the Air Force.
Exactly.
Humans in America forget that NASA was basically a military
exactly.
wing
It's still
for a very long time. And
it's the science wing of the military.
Yeah, the 1980s is when they finally let civilians become astronauts.
So Space Force has been officially declared. There are, I believe, 7,000 active members of the Air Force who are being transferred via database to a different column, or just a different key in the database, and this will identify them as members of Space Force. And then because they don't have uniforms yet, they don't have the insignias, they don't have any of that stuff worked out, but they have to transfer these active duty members of the armed forces to a different branch, the 6th branch. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, because then, so my thing is...
So it's an organization.
In the grand scheme of human history, what it seems like is happening is we're effectively being prepared to interact with a species or federation that a group of people have known about for a long time that humans were not ready or prepared to interact with. And I think that's what's happening, in the sense of, like, if we exist, it's fucking just idiotic to think that it can't happen somewhere else. Just get that off. Like, first off, human-centric, Protestant, like, we're the center of the universe is the most idiotic way to approach life in the universe.
Oh, yeah.
First off. So then you take that into account. The issue becomes trying to understand how species get past the innate resource battles and the path to destruction that we have articulated as a step between type 0 and type 1 civilizations, and clearly we're on the cusp of becoming a type 1 civilization. So in that, if we can make it to becoming a type 1 civilization effectively, then we prove that we can become a type 1 civilization, which would have ultimately, if anything comes past that, then they're going to not, like, in the same way that we have science fiction that establishes a prime directive, anything that passes that type 1 would understand the potential problems of giving type 1 civilization technology to a type 0 civilization that hasn't figured out ethics.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't do that. They would never do that because this is how you fucking end up with people fucking...
You remind me of the human that was tried by the Roman Church. Inventor of the telescope. Galileo is that the one?
Oh,
I'm
I
thinking
thought
of,
you were
right?
talking about Jesus.
We'll go with There's a purported legend when Galileo was being tried that he said something to the effect, the church tells us how to go to the heavens, not how the heavens go. Right? And you make me think of that. It's like not just on a astronomical idea of how the planets move and the number crunching infinity of the known and the unknown universe, but just how humans work on this planet.
Yeah.
And how entities want to dictate almost the numbers, so to speak, right? Like we're not the center of the universe. Well, the numbers say otherwise. You can't argue numbers, right? Even Calvinists know this.
So roughly 90% of all life on Earth now, and including the species that have gone extinct within the last 50 years, are the result of the snowball Earth, when almost all life on Earth disappeared. Like 99% of the Earth disappeared because the Earth froze. Life became so hostile that, Antarctica was essentially...
So we're the accident.
Yeah, no. So that's the thing.
Life finds a way.
All life actually formed
That's
at the
true.
boundary between the ice layer and small pockets of water that were oxygen, that didn't have oxygen, but there was still oxygen trapped, like in the gases that were. So there's this whole molecular exchange between the fluids at the time and the carbon, and then somehow water forms, and then oxygen also forms as a byproduct of this incredibly disastrous Earth. That's where the life begins again. It's in these tiny pockets where there are extremes colliding, hot and cold colliding, and just incredible pressures creating these pockets of catalyst for change. And that's where modern life really comes from. And the few things that did survive, like fucking crocodiles or whatever, those motherfuckers are so fucking resilient, but they still have their temperature ranges where they can survive.
Now you think of the shark, it's technically devolved.
Well, there's that Greenland shark or
right?
whatever
It's a creature that has not had to change. As a matter of fact, it's scaled back.
Yeah.
Like, what was it like?
The megalodon was the size of a school bus at one point. That was the big
Well,
shark.
and I guess it's only devolved technically if you assume size is a benefit.
Yeah.
Because the
That is
issue
true,
is
right?
this is why we don't have Brontosaurus and
It doesn't serve its biological purpose anymore.
When you say that, I think of a megalodon, but I also think of a school of great white shark, kind of like a school of piranha. And I realize that
they don't travel in school though.
Yeah, but they don't have to. I'm imagining some kind of fantasy shark that's similar in size, but works as a group, and that would be something that would be terrifying.
That's a new sci-fi channel film. Right? Sharks that travel in
Shark Hive.
Shark Hive.
Yeah,
Oh my God! Yeah, think about a hive of sharks. That is fucking terrifying.
That's like.
But this is why again we have the difference between apex predators working as individuals. Like a hive of fucking eagles would be just as terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
A flock of eagles.
Well,
I guess.
we know that a pack of wolves is an exceptionally dangerous group of animals.
And that is an interesting point. That's the very first
And
animal that humans domesticated.
The same time, a single wolf is an extremely dangerous animal. And at one time, they just brought them back, the fucking dire wolf.
That's such a bad,
where
bloody idea.
Their shoulder is like 6 feet off the ground. Their shoulder is as tall as they're like 12 feet long. That's a terrible idea. Whoever thought that was a good idea. I mean, like, clearly they were in it for the money.
And then there's a very solid reason. One of the shining moments of humanity, you took a predator that you feared the most. Instead of wiping them out, oh, that's our predator. Let's do something to neutralize it that doesn't involve, well, animal genocide, right?
Yeah.
You domesticate it. You bring it in, make it a dog.
Yeah,
and boom, here we go. And now you humans have these little obnoxious things called pugs. Right? Like,
are they breathing or are they farting?
The stately wolf, and you have the pug.
Well, and this is, the difference between animals that get domesticated versus animals that domesticate themselves. Because in that, cats domesticated themselves.
I have read this. Yeah, it makes a very extreme amount of sense.
And this is also why still you have cats that there's an element of they are not subservient animals. You have to gain their trust, and you have to have an element of cooperative living. And in that, this is you see, I think, squirrels starting to domesticate themselves now.
They're very interesting creatures.
I don't think, I'm starting to wonder if crows are going to domesticate themselves too, because I believe what the issue is humans in America specifically have held on to dogs as the top tier of the hierarchy of animals because they're the most subservient and the most willing to be bred and domesticated. Or I guess not willing necessarily. It was the easiest for them to tackle and have the animals go along with it. So then you have these other animals that are wanting to domesticate themselves but are not seen as important in the hierarchy, so it's harder for them to get involved. And I think so that's kind of where it's gonna, you're gonna have a lot harder time for people to accept a domesticated crow that doesn't want to go in a cage, because they're gonna want it to come back every day, but they're not gonna want to trust that it'll come back every day on its own, because there's this element of control that actually goes along. Like, and this is like, so you saw the dude on Twitter talking about
Black Aziz and Nazi.
Yeah,
he's brilliant.
So this element of there's this history of dog breeding that's directly tied with racism that people may or may not be aware of. So in the 1600s and late 1500s is when race emerged as a concept, and it just happens to be around the time that dog breeding really becomes a thing and starts getting all these technical, quote-unquote, scientific ideas behind it.
Mongoloid, Negroid.
Right, yeah. So that's when all those...
They apply this broken human nomenclature for race, which is not based on anything to dogs.
Yeah, they
right?
emerged at the same time. It emerged about the same time. So this is where it's the idea of when they're trying to do breeding, they're trying to use this construct of different breeds and different species interacting, like, to articulate why Europeans are superior. So it's like they're doing this in the dog breeds and the human element of it. But then people don't know that history, and then just see the dog as the man's best friend in modern times, and have this element of like, oh, we have this dog that's here, and it's like, oh, we've grown with it, but they don't know why we grew with it.
There also seems a disregard for other cultural norms for the use and companionship of dogs, right? Like how Africans see dogs, how the Japanese, for example, throughout, or even how, and you talked about cats self-domesticating.
Mm-hmm.
The cat is not a servile animal.
No, not at all.
But, strange cultural norms of cats. Most cultures, I won't say most, we'll say a lot of human cultures have a folklore that cats see things that humans do not see, supernatural entities, ghosts, if you will, or whatever they have in a tune. That goes back to ancient Egypt.
Yep, and that's
The ancient Egyptians had this love affair with the cat, and then you even go into white cultures of the cat, the Viking tribes.
Freya's had she had a fucking cat sled, right?
Cat sled, and it's a tradition among many of the Viking tribes. And I refer to them as tribes because when you refer to Nordic culture, it's not just the Danes or the Swedes. You have the Norwegians. You had ancient tribes of different Vikings because that was a word that meant raiding, to raid, go Viking. But when a couple would get married, it was a tradition for the husband to give the wife a cat, and the cats that they had were the ancient equivalent. I think the descendant breed is the Norwegian forest cat. They're like 30-40 pounds, right? And the excellent for mousing, and they would keep them in the halls or on the ships. They had a practical purpose.
Yeah.
You know, they killed mice, but they were companions. They weren't servile. They come and go as they please. And it seems like a lot of humans forget this aspect of themselves and focus on this one. We want something that serves us.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, my docile cat, Princess Sweet Peanut Buttercup here.
Yeah, where has she gone, by the way?
She's on the desk.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, she'll move around the room. She'll go into the other room. She watches the house at night. She catches mice that come in at night. It's actually pretty cool. The other cats, they guard the outdoors for the most part. And then, of course, Bruce will chase off everything because he's lightning fast and loud, and most things see some, black bolt come out of the back door, and they just run.
And it's back to your point about the tweet of Black Aziz, right? Like, watching so many people stumble and just give themselves aneurysms over his tweet.
Yeah.
Not seeing what he was really trying to say.
Yeah.
They couldn't step back from themselves. And he proved a point, watching back and watching the pale humans just like, oh my God, dogs. God bless like dogs. We don't wish dogs to be treated inhumanely, but to us, not letting one on your couch or eat from your table is not a matter of cruelty.
Yeah. Well, because then I think in the context, if people don't understand what's being said, the tweet is effectively, it was putting out the concept that, like, the way that white people allow their dogs to sleep in the bed with them and sit on the furniture, it's like an extension of this culture in America that treats dogs better than they treat black people. And that set off a wave of, like, resent towards the idea at all, but people didn't want to accept that as, like, something that's actually a reality of this country, where you look at, like, organizations like PETA, where, I mean, it's okay. You can't shame people for how they expend their energy. That's not something I'm trying to do. But when you have an actual human population that is second class, they have a level of rights that aren't giving to them that other people have. Because the same thing happens to poor white people. They just don't want to admit it to themselves. The issue is like poverty, but there's also an element of racial, institutional racism that affects people that's different from the way poor people get affected. And when you have people who are willing to, like, make issues about dogs and what's happening to animals before they're willing to put time in what's happening for humans, that's the shit where, like, it really pisses black people off to the point where you're like, okay, like, we're here and we're American, but we're not proud of this shit. This is like a byproduct of us being born into this thing. I'm not gonna fucking wave a flag and be like, yay America, because I have people over here who are, like, more willing to put time into, like, saving animals than stopping cops from killing black people. So then there's this element of, like, people don't want to hear that shit. Like, when you have, because the issue is, these are left-wing people I'm talking about. I'm not talking about right-wing people. We know right-wing people are fucking racist. We're talking about the left wing,
the closeted racism of the left.
It's the moderate liberal that Malcolm and Martin Luther King warned black people about in the past. And this issue is like this idea of like you can say that you're not racist, but if you don't do anything about the racism that's happening, like looking the other way and not doing anything is like permitting it to happen.
Yeah,
it's
the bystander that supports you, but supports through inaction.
And then they want to claim that they're left wing. That's the problem. Is like these people want to have their cake and eat it too, and be social justice warriors and tweet about injustice, but then they don't do anything to fuck it. Like, because my issue is like, so when you have people who are like, this is the worst time it's ever been, those people clearly weren't paying attention to.
They've not seen it, right? Like,
right. They weren't listening.
Even us from the outside, it's like, this is the worst you've seen. Have you been in the South?
Right.
Or have you seen human beings lynched hanging from trees? Have you heard of Billie Holiday's
They haven't though.
song, right? You know, what is it? Strange Fruit, right? It's a whole beautiful, not because it's a beautiful lyrical content, but beautiful that she gave it voice. Song about lynching. Humans did this to other humans.
Yeah, and that shit is not happening necessarily.
And then how
now.
dare you call out not letting your dog
or
on your couch, right?
We don't even have to go to lynching. Let's go to Matthew Shepard.
Oh, and that's
Matthew Shepard.
It's
like
absolutely terrible.
Matthew Shepard was not that long ago, but if that shit happened today, like you guaranteed the fucking left wing would like burn some shit down, but they didn't then. So this is what I'm saying. Like shit is the best it's ever been now.
There was an MTV movie.
Of course not.
We can go further with your analogy. Have you ever heard of Stonewall? Right? Have these people ever heard of the Stonewall riots?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right? No, it's not the worst it's ever been. It's the worst that you've ever seen it because you're finally
and this is the issue. They weren't listening to women or minorities before. They weren't paying attention. And now they want to, like, act like they're woke because they're all anti-Trump. And it's like, oh, this is the first time I've ever been politically active. And this is like, I don't know if you guys ever saw that skit with Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock, where it was like when Hillary lost, they were like, oh, nobody could have seen this coming. And it was like black people were like, hey, you guys are so out of touch that you think this is the worst that it's ever been. And that rhetoric is like distancing people even more, because it's like, on the one hand, we're this gets back to the most informed, quote unquote, we've ever been by being inundated with all this information about what's happening. But at the same time, people are so disconnected from history that Watchmen is the first time a large percentage population is hearing about the Tulsa riots.
Is that and also what do they call it? Humans, the Black Wall Street. Is that it?
Yeah,
yeah. Us goblins had seen this years ago.
Right.
And I was like, wow, it sucked back then and it's terrible now, but it's a weird dynamic. Oh, you're going to be offended retroactively about a thing that happened. I mean, I don't know what to say to humans that are like that. Like, you didn't pay attention to it then. Well, why now?
Because it was on a TV show, and it's hot. It's hot now. Yeah, it's hot. It's hot because and that's like shout out to Damon Lindelof for putting some shine on that, because I watched an interview with him where he admitted that he didn't learn about it till recently. And he's like, oh, I bet a lot of other people didn't hear about it. So that's how he wanted to inform people about it and open up the show with this thing and base the concept of that show in something that people probably hadn't heard about for the most part.
To bring it back to what you were talking about the culture of getting it in first and gotta report first. He did. He kind of brought it to the surface in a way that nobody else had. We've talked about it before, but
we're not Damon Lindelof.
Yeah, we don't have that kind of platform. and I'm not saying like that he did a bad job. I think he did a great job, because you're right. He brought it up to this level that it's now part of the cultural dialogue. Yep. And what I think is really incredible is that since the airing of that episode, I've seen more expose type articles and published research papers about Tulsa, and then now it's coming out that Tulsa wasn't the only one, that there are several other city riot events that occurred. They were all orchestrated. You know, they all happened like within, you know, a short period of time of each other. And then they're also finding like mass graves.
Yeah.
And so there's a level of human atrocity towards black people that, you know, the people, Native Americans, the indigenous people of this country faced a lot of you know, opposition from the colonizers. And I'm sure that they're, you know, that's like, that was the blueprint.
Yeah.
And so,
But and here's the issue.
and the scary part is that these are American citizens.
But that's inextricable from my DNA.
Yeah.
Like, I can't just subtract that from my DNA and be like, okay, fuck America.
Yeah.
That's like part of me now.
Yeah.
So then that's the issue of there's this population of people who like have that as their origin stories. And then from there, it's like there's a group of people who are just now finding out about like that recent history, let alone the fucking far shit.
Yeah.
Let alone the Native American stuff. They don't know anything about what happens to the Native Americans.
Yeah.
So it's like, so how do we get those people to then understand like the same, it's
That it happened.
right. But it's the same government infrastructure that did it the first time that is now operating and allowing them to become adults without understanding that, because they have education systems, but the government actively removes anything that makes them look bad from the public school system.
You just reminded me of the saying, as above, so below, and how it applies to this. The idea that I saw a human article about schools in Texas were referring to slaves from the transatlantic slave trade as immigrant workers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, fuck's sake, where does this come from? Who and encoded in human language, you pass on, and we goblins see this. You pass on racism without even knowing it. The expression, for example, it seems kind of innocent when you first hear it, but some people stop and think, and I'm sure you too have heard it, heebie-jeebies. You get the heebie-jeebies about something. Are you familiar where that actually came from?
No.
Heb and Jeebs. It's a Hispanic and Jewish slur slapped together. It gives you the creeps because it's a Jew and a Hispanic. What an awful way. And that's the sort of mechanism that goes, it's a tool in a toolbox, right? Like this sort of willful ignorance is a tool in the toolbox of humans to perpetuate a system. You encode things in it without people even knowing that they're part of it, right? And it's not an excuse for them to behave in such a way, but you move several generations away from a culture that, oh, that gives me the heebie-jeebies. That's fucking awful to say that, once you know what it really means. And then you have a school of people, well, that was a long time ago. Well, goblins don't care. We're very long-lived. A lot of things a long time ago that are not good to have now, right?
Yeah. And that's, you know, it's really crazy. Like you pointed out the mass graves. So the issue is like, it's weird. Like a white person will have to say something in order to justify it. Like a white male specifically. Because the issue is like, if it's happening to women or minorities, it's not accepted until a white male says it. So like, they were saying that 35 people died in Tulsa during those riots, and now they're finding the mass graves, but black people are like, yeah, we've been trying to tell you this shit for fucking 100 years now, but like nobody was listening because we're black. And this gets back to, I think what's happening now is this element of you can't ignore shit away, but in that there's also now people are trying to, it then becomes this issue of like, now it's a tidal wave of people trying to air their grievances, and then everything gets lost in the fray.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's this weird, you know, this gets back to society not being linear. It's like, how do we deal with understanding to deal with hearing everybody's grievances. Like, how do we start ranking them, and how do we deal with them?
Well, now that we know that information isn't a string of ideas, a linear string of ideas, that it's actually a sea of ideas that are constantly interacting and vying for priority and attention and depth and all these other things, we can't just focus on one thing at a time. That's the dilemma. That's why we need to succeed. And when I say we, I don't mean like the people in this room. I mean all of us.
To be fair, the survival and success of your species, we're dependent upon you to survive too. If you guys blow yourselves up, us goblins go too.
You know, that's the thing. If we can't figure out how to successfully marry AI with some kind of quantum computing system so that we can actually, I'm talking about Brain from all of Asimov's stories about robots, the thinking machine that helps us save ourselves. If we can't figure out, how to quit the resource wars, then all it is just a race to the finish, and the finish is quite
destruction.
It's destruction.
You were talking about the sea of ideas.
Nobody wants to be first to that.
I just in my mind that information is like a fractal image. It's spider webs and morphs and changes. On Twitter, I often get into arguments. I used to seem to draw people from this, what is this nonsense, QAnon, these conspiracy theorists, right? That all the politicians are huffing adrenochrome. Is that the name of the drug? It's just insanity.
Is it the same thing that's in the fucking chemtrails?
Yeah, right. And then they were talking about like the whole Pizzagate thing, right? And how it goes back to, I got this first. Well, it's complete shite. Yeah. Like, there is no basement in this pizzeria.
Nope.
And there was a gentleman, and
I'm pretty sure that when someone comes forward to the authorities and says that they know anything about, anyone raping children, I believe they like to call it non-consensual sex with a minor, but that's rape.
Yeah, that's such a weird nomenclature.
Yeah,
why do you say it that way?
I think that when anyone comes forward, they are automatically a suspect. You can't just know something about that kind of shit without being a suspect.
Yeah.
Because
it's a very weird subculture.
The act of coming forward with information like that means that you have already been exposed to that kind of shit, and that these people. You can't know those people without being a part of that crap.
These humans come out of an internet subculture of I don't know if it's moved on to something else other than 4chan, but we know all these networks, and I'm like, wow, that's insanity. You know these networks, but you're just going to sit there and sit on it and tweet about it. You're not going to... This is madness. But you're going to go accost a pizza place with no basement because you're absolutely sure that there's a pedophile ring and drug smuggling and shape-shifting lizards underneath.
This gets back to the fucking armchair specialist. So they want to be like fucking Elliot Ness and become the sheriff all of a sudden and go bust this guy without going through fucking school to become a cop.
They watched a YouTube video.
Right.
I've heard countless humans. Well, I saw this YouTube video. The Holocaust didn't happen. And if you ever want to see a goblin drop his jaw and run away, that's the moment. I have nothing to say to you.
Yeah.
You really just said that out loud.
Well, and this is they made us go, well, not made us. They gave us the opportunity to go to the Holocaust Museum in 8th grade, and I definitely understand exposing people at that age to it, because if you don't understand that event at an early enough age, then you can become an adult and say some dumbass shit like the Holocaust never happened, and be an adult that can vote and have that fucking worldview.
I just want to clarify. Are these also the people that believe in the invisible sky friend who had a child, surreptitiously with some woman farmer?
Blonde-haired, blue-eyed child in Middle East.
In the Middle East,
Is that the same? Is this the same?
These goblins have been on the earth. They're trying to wrap our minds around the white Jesus. And I've heard you go, if you even go further back, what is this Jesus name?
Right,
It's
no.
Yahshua.
Yeah.
Right, if you go back to
And
the
then,
Hebrew. Not
so-
that goblins are experts, but we pick up things over the years of our
No,
existence.
there's Jesus, and we're thankful that Jesus does the things that Jesus does because there are a bunch of people in this country that don't want to work on the farm anymore, but they love to rally behind this romanticized farmer that is out in the field picking crops and supporting their family.
But that's actually Jesus.
That's actually Jesus.
Well, I've grown quite a fancy to the human meme of Schrodinger's immigrant.
Yeah.
He's either lazy and worthless, or he's stealing your job.
Right,
Well, which one is it?
Look, if a lazy immigrant can steal your job,
Well, and they seem to act that this very highly educated. Well, let's go with the analogy of a Persian physician or an Indian engineer. Oh, those foreigners are stealing our jobs. I was like, that woman is an engineer. That man is a highly qualified neurosurgeon. I don't think Joe Bob from Tulsa, Oklahoma, that you're in front of losing your job at the factory to this engineer.
Oh, man.
yeah.
Well, and those people are the same ones that didn't obviously read the story of Jesus or Yeshua, whatever you want to call him, or Issa. Because I'm looking at it.
The Arabic name.
Yeah,
I love the
'cause, like-
Arabic name the best. I think that's a great name, Isa.
He was a poor dude. You're not gonna like, if you're not paying attention to poor people, you're gonna miss him.
Yeah.
So that's where you have all these people who roll their windows up and lock their doors when they have poor people around or fucking somebody asking for money. But I'm always like, oh, let me talk to this dude, because this might be fucking, if Jesus is a real thing, this poor dude's probably gonna be him, or this poor woman, like,
They
like
seem
this poor kid.
The goblins are quite fond of the iteration of Yahshua chasing moneylenders from the temple.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very goblin of him, and that's not a pejorative. That's a high quality among us.
I always thought it would be really awesome if Arnold Schwarzenegger were to reprise the role of Jesus. You know, can you imagine?
It's a terrible "I'll be back" line. Right?
No, he'd say something like, "Get out! This is God's house. You cannot gamble in here. Father, why have you forsaken
Did the
me?"
voice work in Conan. That's brilliant. That's fantastic. I can't get over. That's uncanny how much that sounds like Arnold.
So my thing is, like, the stories of him that are in the Bible compared to the ones that are not in there. Like, if you're going to say the Bible is canon, but these other things are not canon, that doesn't mean those other things aren't real.
Well, that's
You
you
know?
the Goblins' wheelhouse. Us being kind of amateur historians by nature. 4th century, approximately 325, I believe, right? Council of Nicaea, if I'm pronouncing it properly. There are reports, even in official Catholic documents, right, that there were 1,000 some Gospels
Right.
that they filtered through. What were the criteria that they narrowed it down to 4 of them? I've always wondered that, because they wouldn't let us goblins in. We're not privy to that. They wouldn't let us know. And out of that, you got 4 Gospels and a bunch of letters written several years after Jesus' death.
Yeah. Well, and in that, basically, if you read the stuff that's been left out, what it seems like they were doing is, first off, they're reformulating the Jesus character to be a weak-ass sheep, bitch-ass character. He's just a bitch. Like, that's the only way to describe him, because the other issue is the stuff that they removed is
Arnold
him.
Jesus wouldn't be a bitch.
No. But this Jesus isn't a bitch in the first place, but they made him a subservient bitch to reinforce his narrative so that everybody else just becomes a bitch on this plane to then wait for...
That's why
this
Arnold
is the
Jesus
second
would
part.
be so good, because he
They're
wouldn't be
waiting-
like that at all.
They're waiting for the return and the rapture, which has already happened in the text that they took out, to make it so that if you're waiting for this dude to come back and save you, that you put off rewards in this lifetime for rewards in heaven. So it's a twofold thing of, like, giving him an example of, like, being a subservient little weakling who isn't Arnold looking, who's not the Samson, when in fact he would have been a magician who, when he went and studied with in the East, the Far East, he would have been most likely doing like yoga or martial arts. So he would have actually been proficient in some sort of physical exercise, like most likely.
He'd have some kind of physical intelligence level.
Exactly,
like
that's far superior of the average person.
Yeah. And if you go into the Essenes, the tradition that he sort of is born out of, even on the West, it's inaccurate to call it Western, but his Middle Eastern, for lack of proper nomenclature, that humans confuse me with how they orient the globe, right?
Yeah.
The Essenes were basically Jewish warrior monks, if you boil them down, right?
Yep.
And another point that just you made it pop in my head is the rapture concept is not even 200 years old, but you can't convince American Christians. And we had spoke earlier that the man, the preacher, Protestant preacher that sort of invented it, predicted the end of the world twice.
The word rapture, I don't even think the word rapture is even in the Bible.
No, it's not. It's an invention of the late 1800s American experience. It's like the whole idea of the human invention of Mormonism. It's this strange marriage.
It's the final judgment in the Bible.
Speaking of things that have been invented.
It's a strange marriage of American 1800 nationalism with a very strange form of Christianity.
So that's... I'm really glad that you mentioned this synthetic culture, because recently I read this article about Bushido, and people are describing it as bullshito.
Yeah.
Because up until, it
was like 1960s when it was invented. For like Western culture, basically.
It was invented as a tourist attraction.
Yeah.
It was written by a guy who wanted to write prose of the East in an effort to increase tourism. It wasn't a concept.
No.
It wasn't created by the diminishing samurai culture that turned.
Because there's also Budo.
Yeah.
Those I think Budo and Bushido.
We are Budo, the warrior's way, the way Japanese way.
Yeah.
Japanese is very limited, but I have distant cousins in Japan.
So there's this entire culture of fetishizing the East that's based on a lie.
And the modern, even a more modern equivalent is what's the word that I've heard in the past 20, 30 years that makes me chuckle. When I talk to my Japanese cousins, otaku.
Otaku.
This is an insult in Japanese. They're like, it just means nerd. Not quite.
No.
When you speak to, proper Japanese folks, both of the goblin variety and humans, we call one of the terms bakemono, mujina, the distant cousins. Hanya, the mask. You see the Hanya mask, right? Representations of us in Japan. But I digress. The idea that otaku, it's an insult. And there's this weird, I think that anime is a great cultural thing. Some of it's fantastic to watch as a human invention. But this whole sort of fetishize vision of Japan that only exists in anime and how it exists. If you go back to the samurai, you want to really ruffle the feathers of a super machismo Westerner. Tell them that a lot of samurai were very openly gay or bisexual. They did not have a hang-up about this. The only thing that was expected of them...
There wasn't even a concept of perversion in Japanese culture until Western missionaries showed up and gave them shame.
The only sort of...
That's what the West brought to Japan.
The only obligation,
a bottle of shame.
Like if you were, say, a Shamura, which was a prominent clan, right? But you were gay. You would do whatever it took to get your wife pregnant. You'd have your brother have sex with her, or whatever would happen, it would still be a Shamura. But they didn't have a hang-up about this. And this goes into also watching humans be fascinated in the West by the Spartans.
Right.
I was like, do you understand what they were and what culture they went to? Goblins don't have a problem as long as things are consensual. Like what was the Spartan word for the agoge? Is that the proper term that they use for the way they schooled Spartan warriors? I think that's what it was. the sort of man and boy thing is a little strange to us goblins. If it's past a certain threshold of age of consent, we're okay.
Right.
But do Americans that
I don't
have
think
their,
they do.
their Molin
Well-
Labe stickers that they have all over the place, and their
Or that Spartans had slaves and shit, while others...
they were called helots. Yeah, there was a
Yeah.
slave class which enabled them to be warriors 24/7. They had an entire slave caste.
No, so they were incorporated essentially and had people that worked for them to make sure that their business was maintained.
Yeah, aye.
Because then this is juxtaposed. I mean, Athenians weren't perfect either, because they definitely did some fucked up shit too. But they had like more, like
Fucked up shit. They invented democracy. That's bad. Like,
well, I was gonna say they had more attempts at equality.
Yeah.
Let's call it. Not to say that they executed them correctly.
But it seems, to be fair, a noble attempt at it then, yeah.
Yeah, because I
Well,
mean they were definitely
you know,
diddling kids too.
the problems that a lot of these cultures have are resolved over, a couple thousand years of horrible dialogue that nobody wants to talk about to get to a resolution.
Right.
And so it's like you've maintained, it's not like it hasn't just gotten this bad. This is the standard for thousands of years. Shit's been fucked up, and it takes a long fucking time for people to come around to talk about it. Where we are, how many years from Tulsa? How many?
About almost 102
almost
years.
100 years from Tulsa. Yeah. It took 100 fucking years for our society to reconcile enough whatever to be able to even
discuss it.
Yeah, to even make it a dialogue.
In a fictional form.
In a fictionalized version.
Even if you take
100 years.
You take that and apply it to something else. How long did it take Western human academia to recognize that Egyptians were not white?
I don't know if they have yet. Honestly.
No, they haven't. There's still depictions of old white people.
By like the 70s or 80s did archaeologists...
They're still trying to claim Cleopatra as like...
Well, would she be like basically of Greek and African descent?
Not white.
Yeah, but not white.
That's what I'm saying. It's like, they're still trying to be like, well, she was Northern Greek, but she still wasn't white. Like, the same thing as being like, Hannibal was Northern... Well, yeah, he still wasn't white.
You take the idea of the lower kingdoms, which were in the north, because they go by the flow of the Nile, goes from south
White
to
had
north.
not emerged yet.
Like,
it
the
still hadn't
empires
been a thing.
of... the old terms for them, Kush and Punt, I believe, they were sub-Saharan African.
Yep.
As beautifully dark as those peoples can be. The Egyptians, at least from even official records, when you take scrolls and you take stelas, they bragged about their sub-Saharan African ancestry. Now, the northern Egyptians would be probably a proto-Arabic Semitic culture, still not white. And then you get into the insanity of the ancient aliens.
So what if it turns out that Cleopatra and Grace Jones are like doppelgangers?
Right.
Like straight up. Like, would it freak everyone out? Because I think that'd be pretty fucking cool.
I think it definitely smashes a paradigm of some humans when you take what they see as a well-established thing, right? Like, oh, these pharaohs were white-looking. No, they were probably
no, straight up. Like, if she like Grace Jones is like her long distant descendant. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like,
well, at the same time though, I feel like based on Grace Jones's look, she'd probably be farther east African, so it would be more like
Ethiopia,
Sudan, maybe.
Sudan.
Yeah, probably, because her face is like very.
That's aquiline, and it's
sharp.
very sharp. Yeah, right. Like, it's not a Western African thing; it's more east.
Yeah, I feel like she's a lot more eastern.
And you got to just open up another a 10, right, of things.
Well,
like,
Egypt's like totally on the eastern edge.
But it's like
Egypt is a melting pot.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
always has
that's
been.
what I mean.
And
like,
they look very diverse there.
Sudan
so.
is right next to Egypt.
Well, if
It's all. I mean, it's all right.
Well, even
it's all right next to itself. It's
You
the Mediterranean.
You take the idea of the Phoenician language.
Mm-hmm.
Linguistically, is classified as a Semitic language. It's a Semitic language. That's not white. But yet everybody paints the Phoenicians as these proto-Greek seafaring. No, they were.
Wait, they were seafaring? That means they spoke some variation of pirate.
Yeah,
Straight up. Nobody speaks a clean dialect if you're on a boat because everything's pitching all over the place.
Anybody who trades, you might as well throw out this human construct of racial purity.
Yeah.
Anybody who travels the waters.
Which is why tribes dominated until this idea of race began to emerge in a place where they wanted to say that they were dominant, and that's European science, and that's kind of again what's the word, turning of laboratory, I guess formalization of the scientific process happened in a place where it was also people that wanted to prove that they were superior. So it just happens to be at this time like the modern quote unquote scientific paradigm was created by people who were also happen to be shitty people, and that happens sometimes.
And here's the thing that I always chuckle when I hear the pale humans discuss their academic achievements, which I won't rob what they have done, but you look at them and be like, the majority of the stars in the sky are Persian or Arabic names.
Right.
They are not the Greek gods.
Yeah.
Or the Roman gods.
Well, because
now the more accessible ones that we know, the planets in the system, right, are named after those. But the majority of all the stars in the sky.
The problem is, all of the stuff that was learned during the Islamic Golden Age was destroyed in connection to society, which is why you have a mystical Islamic society now, or Muslim society. In that, like, there's still Islamic academics and scholars that are very scientific oriented and don't subscribe to anything that the orthodox mystical sects subscribe to. And it's the same shit with Jews, same shit with Christians, because then you find out like I think it's like 60% of people in Western academia identify as religious, like of some sort, and it's like it's not Catholic, it's not First Presbyterian. There's like a general identity of religious affiliation in Western academia, even down to the person who quote unquote discovered the Big Bang Theory was a fucking Jesuit priest. So there's all these things concerning the perception of being disconnected from religious ideology when in fact you may be delving deeper into something that has a heart of religious ideology. But the issue becomes a lot of Western discovery was stolen and then rediscovered after they made people stupid.
Well,
with the Dark Ages.
That's brilliant because a lot of the Western classics that the pale humans are like, oh, Plato, this and that. They were sitting there at Constantinople, written in Arabic, while Rome was busy chasing its tail. When Rome was sending parish priests to big councils, the Byzantine Empire would send scholars that spoke 4 or 5 languages, could read in 6 or 7. That they would, and it's an arrogance, and it's an arrogance that you still see that comes out of Rome as both a physical place and a symbol of a place. They're the center of the universe.
Well, and that's funny because then this is where you still get people who are Turkish who will still like harken back to that 1453 victory in the same way, the people in the South harken back to that fucking
what's it called?
1800 loss.
Geocentric model of the solar system, right?
Jerusalem.
Have you ever seen one of those animated?
Yeah.
They look
Yeah.
incredible. It turns into these all sorts of weird, like spirograph looking things.
Mm-hmm.
And but then if you try to imagine that in the context of our galaxy, let's just think of it in terms of one wing of the Milky Way, one of the spirals the one that we're on. For all of that to spin around the Earth, that's just like beyond. There would be stars traveling at speeds, like incomprehensible speeds, faster than light speeds. For a geocentric model of the universe to function, and it would be such a small, limited space for it to actually be contained, because there would be so much energy expended in this. I mean, we would be the black hole of existence, essentially, for that to happen.
How small-minded does it seem for the entire scientific field to have that be?
How profound that somebody might conceive that existence occurs in the singularity of a black hole, like thousands of years before anyone could conceive of a black hole through physical properties.
I mean, but even in that construct, there's fractals that they wouldn't have.
There are all sorts of things that they would have had to skip just to get there, and that's like. It's just like
he just jumps into a realm that Michio Kaku gets an aneurysm, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, but this gets back to, Thanos' snap seemed to be a big deal, but when you're like looking at the grand scheme of epics, the Crisis on Infinite Earths is the most epic of all epics in that it deals with the multiverse on different planets as well. So it's like, it's funny, we're getting to a point where we have epics like the Odyssey, and we're like, that's kind of epic, It's dealing with this small region and this small portion of humanity.
As watching humans grow, how the world that they view is, say, X-sized, and then it grows and expands. Like, I had heard humans argue about the theological underpinnings of the biblical doctrine of the flood.
Mm-hmm.
And I was impressed with some of the humans that actually said out loud, well, to those tribes that existed in that part of the world at that time, was their entirety of their physical world. It's where they lived.
Yep.
And I'm like, that actually makes sound. It's a sound idea. But to say it's global goes back to the whole sort of very simplistic, fundamental understanding of things that is astoundingly bad. It's when you reduce things. Mm-hmm. Simple is simple. Simple doesn't have to be complicated. Complicated doesn't mean depth. Simplicity doesn't mean shallow. But throwing those at some humans, it's like your inability to understand nuance is not my problem kind of moment.
And unfortunately it is, because we have to live with them. That's the like double-edged sword of coexistence, because then it's like, do you want to spend your time educating people who are ignorant, or figuring out ways to avoid and insulate yourself from interacting with those ignorant people? Because it's like, you can only do one or the other.
Eventually, you're going to have to explain something to somebody.
As a goblin that seeks employ at a haunted attraction for part of the year, I have to interact with humans I do not know, which is a chore. And one of the seems constant things that I'm arguing, your accent, is it British? Yes. But qualifiers. It's British, yes, but there are several accents on the Britain, right?
Yeah, there's just one British.
Yeah, they conflate.
The singular British accent.
They conflate England.
Hey, you know what? There's only one Chinese language too, apparently.
Never mind that there's actually quite a handful, right? Yeah. And dialects on top of the actual language.
Yeah.
You move into like.
I think they're like 4 Chinese languages, and then right now they're focused on Mandarin.
Is Mandarin and Cantonese the 2 major branches, and then it splits from there, or are there even more major branches?
I think there's old versions of Chinese that don't even get used. I think it's something like there are some total of like 40 or 50,000 characters for Chinese, like modern Chinese. But then you add in like old Chinese, and it gets closer to like 100,000 characters.
Wow.
So there's like this entire language that's been going on for, close to 10,000 years, and they've lost significant chunks of it because we can't really store information like, forever.
No, there's no such thing.
There's a point where information retrieval is no longer possible because of decay or, unforeseen environmental factors that cause degradation of the storage medium, all sorts of things. But there's a language that's been around and in use for a really fucking long time, and we don't really see it that way. I'm pretty sure that Chinese is being Romanized as we speak.
Yeah, it's
So it can
sadly
be-
so. And going back to the whole idea of the British, you can't tell. It's like, oh, there's this variations of Scot accents. There's Welsh. There's Cornwall, right? And even among the English, somebody from Birmingham, and I think, what was the human term? Brummies. They call themselves Brummies. And then you got Liverpool, there's Scousers, right? All different. Like, the most famous Scousers are the Beatles, right? Hey, Paul.
So, in the, when was it? It was like, I think around the late 1600s, early 1700s. Like, during, like, the peak of colonization. There were a lot of people that came to this country, and they brought over a language from England. And it's very similar to the language that we speak now. And it wasn't till closer to the War for Independence that in England and all of the colonies, all of the empire, they started, as people rose through the business class and into the higher social status, because you can't really become part of the aristocracy without, marrying into it. But they started dropping the R, because it was associated with the Americas, and it was common.
Oh, it was the colonists. It was the way the colonists spoke.
Yeah,
is what the British back then, and I have to use that blanket term because a lot.
English was actually more similar to the way that we speak English now in terms of delivery than the way that we hear English in England, because of this social convention that occurred because of economic prosperity. So it's really kind of unique. The changes in language and dialect that occur through economic improvement,
through trade,
through
colonization.
yeah.
There are always these mechanisms. Even on the Isle of Britain, Cornish is its own language. The Cornish speak.
Fucking Welsh is not English. It's something else.
Welsh
it's
is
like its own thing.
Welsh is a Celtic language, right? And even the Scots speak Gaelic. And in Scotland, they don't call it Gaelic. It's Scots Gaelic or Gaelic. And, that language used to be in my repertoire years ago, but it's faded over time. I've forgotten I could say a few things, and that's about it. And there are probably only a handful of things now, to be honest. But the idea that even...
I bet some of them are curse words or phrases that tell people off.
I remember the name Glasgow, which is Glasgow.
Oh, yeah.
But it's sort of the human construct that everything is homogenized. And I see applied this to people of African descent. And I even hate to say African because it's a bloody continent. It's gigantic. Because the Sudanese or the Ethiopians are vastly different in genome and cultural and language than, say, the Nigerians. Strengths and weaknesses. Each culture has a beauty and an ugliness, just like anybody else. When I see humans,
There are indigenous black populations throughout Asia, throughout Southeast Asia, through all of Asia. And these are, never really, people don't really think about this. Mm-hmm. They're people with extremely concentrated melanin levels in their skin in like Malaysia and the Philippines and Indonesia and parts of China and in India.
You want to look at these, when I see a lot of white humans, I'm like, your assumptions are not always so. And whatever it is about. Like all Italians, for example, a strange analogy. All Italians don't speak Italian. You go up to the northeast corner of Italy, you have a bunch of Italians that speak an Austrian dialect of German because they're near Austria. And some of them probably don't even know what side of the border that they're actually on. right?
Well, that's the brilliance of the European Union and Schengen zones that allow for transit between different regions.
You know,
These artificial
there's
borders.
this idea that like people are homogenized. People don't always think in blocks.
Yeah.
People
Well,
always
it's
what
the
they
same
see.
thing in France in Alsace-Lorraine. It's like they have a cross between, I think it's German and French that emerged as like a dialect there because they went back and forth between control of those nations so many times over history that the local culture
Yeah,
is
well,
like,
the
mix.
story that was once related to me by a human about the term French fry theoretically came out of the Second World War of American soldiers in Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
In the French-speaking part, the Walloons is what they're called. They refer to themselves as Walloons. They're French-speaking Belgians in the south that borders France. And they would thinly fry the potatoes, and they would use mayonnaise instead of ketchup. But to an American soldier who was not aware of the cultural idiosyncrasies of Belgians who speak Flemish versus those who speak French, they automatically assumed that they were still in France.
So what if I told you that the Han Chinese had been stir frying, and I mean deep frying, strips of potato and other vegetables in oil in woks since pre Genghis Khan.
I would not be bloody surprised.
So-
Marco Polo stole your noodles, right? Like the noodles from, it's all about, like you
There's
said,
this
like,
whole world of culinary tradition that's like, it's like, oh yeah, we invented frying this stuff. It's like, guys,
we did it. You know,
China did
you
this,
watch the arguments that the Greeks and the Turks often have of the same human food, but they just simply have a different name for it.
yeah.
It's
yeah.
like, wait, you both share this same dish, and it's quite wonderful when I eat either variation, and they are slightly different, but it's the same bloody thing.
Yeah.
But you got in this bloody pissing contest.
It's about the name.
Yeah,
So at
about
that
the
point,
name.
it's branding.
Yeah, it's branding.
It's
That's
like
probably,
the
yeah.
difference between what's that horrible company that's stealing all the water?
Nestle.
Nestle.
That's,
Yeah, it's like the difference between Nestle and Hershey.
Yeah.
And sadly, I've seen pale humans do this to people of different beautiful flavors of African descent. They assume that it's all, and that's sadly just the benevolent side of racism. I don't think there truly is a benevolent side, but for that
They're just
nomenclature,
ignorant.
you know, it's
Yeah,
like,
that's totally the imperialist way of describing anything right there. That's the language of the oppressor, straight up.
well, it
Saying
absolutely
just
is. That's-
using benevolence and racist behavior. It's like that's in any kind of descriptor other than that is fucked up. Is just
Yeah, you look at a thing as a goblin, and we're like, that's so terrible. At the minimum, I'm just going to assume you're just terribly negligent. And at the worst, I'm just going to assume you're completely racist and beyond redemption. And it's like the wisdom of it is like, here is, well, how you said earlier, is like, do you teach this miscreant either by some sort of, go back to the benevolent, do you teach him in a benevolent manner, or do you put a foot somewhere where it shouldn't go?
yeah.
You know, because you've had it.
Like I'm just trying to imagine a gentle side of racism, and I feel like there isn't one. I can usually imagine all sorts of weird shit, but this is just one of those things where it's like, it just makes me feel like I need to wash my hands.
Well, I guess it would be illustrated of the terms ethnocide versus genocide.
Yeah.
It's like, it's equal. I wouldn't say it's equally aberrant to us goblins to wipe out an ethnicity or a culture, because people are most important, even the ones we don't like. We're like, well, you're still a sentient being.
I
But
think.
to wipe out somebody's culture is still very insidious to us.
Well, that's the thing is, we're all humans. The only real separations are cultural, and so we have ethnic groups. So it's really about ethnicity and on some level becomes about nationalism for people that are stupid enough to think that a Mexican is, just like a broad nationality describes all of the ethnic groups that live within Mexico and who comprise the culture
what
of
tribe?
Mexico.
You go back to tribes. Is that a Mexica? Is that a descendant of the Mexica? Or is that a descendant of this tribe? Like
eventually that becomes so granular that it's not even important. It becomes this, once we're talking about like ideological ethnocentrism, we're looking at something that doesn't care about what's unique about a culture.
Yeah,
They just
true,
they just see something as, the other, and the other is the thing that needs to be, cast out so that it doesn't affect, whatever they're used to.
And that seems so ingrained in you humans. Things that I have said to different groups at the haunted house, right? I had a group of students that happened to be Indian of descent, and they were a fantastic group, and I was the British expression, taking the piss, having fun with them, and I said something about their kind, and instinctively guys, oh, us Indians, and I looked, I was like, that's not what I meant. I meant humans. And he sort of stepped back. It's just like, I meant human. Oh, okay. Like, he wasn't angry because he thought it was a jest too. But I was like, that's not what I meant. And it's like how ingrained it is in humans to identify and codify, and you want everything in a group. It's like I made this statement once years ago. I was like, a human is the idea that like you're just generic, supposedly human in a lot of white Americans' eyes. But the moment you misbehave, you're not like, we'll use the analogy of dogs. Oh, it's like all dogs, right? Like, and we'll step into the cowpie of the ridiculous all lives matter garbage that I hate from them. Like, as soon as that dog misbehaves, all of a sudden you're a Labrador, you're a pit bull. All of a sudden your specific breed of dog becomes important. Why?
Well, and this gets back to
I don't know if you can answer that from a goblin point of view. Looking at it, looks at it.
I can't answer it, but I can give an example of humans not being able to like not do it. So I don't know if you've both heard about the J.K. Rowling shit that's happened last week.
Well, I've got something about
transphobic remarks.
I've got something about the importance of understanding a dog's breed, and also a concern about too much information in the hands of people who want to be authorities or experts about a subject without going to school about it.
No, they seem to go hand in hand.
Well, there's this dilemma, and if you read a lot and you start to develop some kind of interdisciplinary understanding of what's going on, and you can explain yourself, that's one thing. But if it's just I keep reading all these things about it. I read a lot of statements like this on the internet, so I'm really wary of the internet at this point. I just look for the articles and I try to avoid the comments. But so here's the thing: if you know what breed of dog you have, you could be aware of all of the potential genetic disorders that it might have. And this is only within the last decade that people have access to any kind of genetic testing that might reveal these kind of traits. So now, knowing this, you can either spend the rest of the time you have with this dog worried that these things might express themselves, and they might not. Chances are they won't, because these are concerns that are this happens at very low percentiles. Most of the dogs that have these experiences generally die.
I don't know if that's the case.
No,
I don't know if that's the case.
And I think that the concern, my concern is that people will be armed with so much information that they will treat their dogs differently, and they won't their dogs will no longer be able to have their best life, because now it's like, oh crap. It's like a helicopter parent that's afraid to let their kids play in the yard because they might climb the tree and fall out of it, and even though they never even get interested in climbing a tree.
That is strangely a brilliant analogy of too much information. You're so immobilized and crippled of what might be, and the human anxiety kicks in. That's something to behold. Human anxiety just dizzies the goblin mind.
For sure. But and this gets back to, okay, so what I think is at the core, whether they have those numbers and the analysis or not, most people are concerned with two things at the core. Number one, can I have sex with it?
And how much does it cost?
And number two,
what a creepy mode of thought.
Number two, can I control it?
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you why those two things are at the core of what I think are driving the incessant
Gotta gene map everything.
degradation of culture towards these things. So first off, the idea of gender and people's obsession with other people's gender. First off,
I love how you said that, with other people's gender, and it's very intrusive.
it
Boom,
is.
right. You've hit it
So
right on the head.
this
right?
is
Let it go.
why my thing is, what happens is people want to be concerned with other people's gender because they want to make sure if they sexualize something that it's not what's the word? It's not deranged. It's deviant. There's people who want to make sure if whatever they're fantasizing about is not seen as deviant by society, so then that they can fantasize about that thing collectively. An example, anytime a girl turns 18,
Oh, I noticed that.
anytime a girl,
is that her
yeah,
name?
she's the one that happened recently. You see all these fucking creepers come out of the woodwork. She's 18. Guess what happens now? Nothing.
Same thing
Nothing
that happened
happens.
You know what? Sadly,
You show yourself as a creep is what happens.
Sadly, I see a bunch of young, broken human men in their basements of their mom's flats with little skull cards, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, wow, you're broken. You're quite
So
broken.
number one, can I have sex with it? And number two, can I control it? Is what these two cultural phenomena seem to be pointing towards, in the sense of like, the whole reason Me Too was a problem is because it exhibited to people that no longer are bodies subject to external control by another involuntarily. And that before we're coming out of a time where like chattel is like most people, and this gets back to like Christianity teaches you that kids are chattel basically.
Yeah, it's an awful practice.
In that they don't have the capacity to think for themselves or responsibility for themselves. So they're their parents' property until they turn 18 or the age of ascension or whatever the fuck they want to call it. There's some weird name for it. But ultimately, it's not just a legal number. There's like a cultural issue of until you're a certain age, you're your parents' property. And then in certain cases, like especially in the South, like, there's not a whole lot of familial barriers. Can I have sex with it? That shit is like, ultimately, especially in like, what's it called? British feudalism. Like, inbreeding was seen as preferred.
In British royal families.
Yeah, so like,
the barriers of what
it's
was
only
taboo, yeah.
it's only very recently that inbreeding is like seen as a cultural problem, because now we have the understanding to know that it creates biological. Exactly, but it's only that's very recent.
Yeah, well, that's why I think it's important that as genetic testing becomes more widely available to the average person who feels that they need to perform genetic testing on their dog, that they proceed with caution, because it opens up this giant Pandora's box of concerns.
It's like, are you mature enough for this science and the ethics that go with it?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on in there.
Back to your idea that humans, some humans, it wouldn't be fair to say all humans, that they want to have sex with it right out of the gate, or can I? Watching things like years ago, this singer, she had the meltdown, was a Disney teen star. Well, that probably explains something, right? They hypersexualize a 15-year-old, and then schizophrenically the same sort of mechanism shames the men that are attracted to said teenager. It's a very weird dynamic to watch this play out.
Yeah.
Like, you have one wing of the media that puts her in videos, right, and hypersexualize, like, that is a bloody human child.
I mean, it'd be different if they did it and were like, I mean, it wouldn't be different, it'd still be wrong, but if they use that to then like jail those dudes, but it just inflames their
it's
interest.
Like
They bring them out and get their money, but they don't then bring out Chris Hansen and say, hey, now we caught you fucking looking at Britney Spears.
Yeah, why are you looking
now
at
we're
a
gonna
bloody
fucking
child?
lock you up. They don't go that far. If they went that far, I wouldn't have necessarily a problem with it. Like I'd have a problem with them using her as bait in the first place. It'd be different if they dressed up somebody who's like 25 to pretend that, but that's not what they do.
Humans do that.
Yeah, that's a whole different, But again, the way that they're doing it was because we had a society that was unethical, and now we're moving towards a more ethical state, and it's like people don't want to acknowledge that those people are still around, and what do we do with them? Like, how long, when's the cutoff date for the prosecution for their crimes? Like, society doesn't want to handle that. Everybody wants to use cancel culture, but that's like enough for, I think, a lot of people to just cancel them, and then they're like, okay.
It's an interesting dynamic to watch the human, that sort of this beginning of the call-out culture that I've started to see, right? I saw an article written about, of all people, Lou Reed. Velvet Underground, his solo music. I don't know how familiar you are with Lou Reed. And it was a strange article, and it focused on his song Walk on the Wild Side and how it was transphobic and this and that. And I was like, did this human writing this article not understand who Lou Reed is?
Right, yeah.
Like, the lyrical content in Walk on the Wild Side, yes, it's dated, right? I mean, the line is on All the Colored Girls Go, right?
Lou Reed has done quite a bit.
Yeah,
for
and I'm not going to fault him for
everyone.
that. It's not language that should or could be used now, right? But going back to this argument of the article, which about its supposed transphobia, it's like those were his friends and lovers that he sings about in that song. Like, that was his scene. Those were his people. Like, why are you doing this to him? I didn't understand. I was like, Lou Reed is not your enemy. This
Lou Reed-
asshole passing bathroom laws so somebody can't go to the bathroom, that's your enemy.
Yeah.
I feel like Lou Reed was a very visible, gay rights activist in as far as musicians went. Like, very early
exactly
on.
my
Like,
point. Yeah,
I think he's
that's-
done his contributions to like gay culture are everlasting, whether people even realize it or not. You can't be that close to Andy Warhol, and
Well, I mean, he himself was, I believe, openly bisexual, and he had a thing for like very gender fluid, and the nomenclature in the 70s was transvesticism or transvestites. You don't use that nomenclature anymore, and that's okay. Language changes and evolves.
But this is the problem. A transvestite
and it is a different nomenclature than
is somebody
what
who cross dresses, right?
Right.
They don't actually change their. So this is like my issue is like, if we can't discuss somebody who's cross dressing versus somebody who fucking sacrifices their dick. Let's call it what it is. They're giving up their junk. Like, that's not the same thing. So if we can't have like,
they're not stuffing those balls up there into the abdomen.
and this is kind of where, to me, like, if somebody is cross dressing and then they're calling themselves transgender, that to me is a problem.
Well,
This starts to get to an issue of like, this is like what's like, okay, I think there's an issue with transgender rights when people are actually just cross-dressing and they want to claim transgender and then get the same rights as somebody who's actually transgender, because then it's like they're fucking blurring a real line.
That's a mechanism used by the oppressor to take away, to devalue the rights that oppressed groups have gained for themselves. It's a way of leveraging a leveling tool.
But you see white dudes doing it a lot of times,
of course.
and that's what I was going to get at.
That's because there's a culture of doing that.
Yeah,
where it's like, oh, these benefits, these people, we're all about equality here. Well, those things should help me too, and that's not the way that it works. That's not how we create an equitable society.
Yeah,
there seems to be a whole clique of white human young men that are trolls in the wrong way. Mm-hmm. They'll do things and make viral videos of either a falsely edited or a completely false event or thing to discredit
or even a deep fake, and they'll consume time on a supercomputer to do it.
Yeah,
and it's a frightening thing to see that it's like when you've got somebody that is struggling with the identity of their soul and versus their body and mind, and they don't feel like they're in the right one, and they have this incredibly difficult struggle. And there's some arsehole that thinks that, oh, I'm going to discredit them by doing a drag video, but I'm not really a drag queen. You know what I mean? It's like, that's not your nomenclature. That's not your place.
Yep.
Step back from it. You don't need to belong to every club. You don't want to belong to every club. I don't want to go to the Human Survivors of Lung Cancer Club, if there's such a thing. I don't want to be in that club, and I'm happy not being in that club.
Because I struggle to know if they're doing it on purpose to be trolls, or if they just don't understand that they're not actual transgender people. Because, like, this is my thing. So I have no problem recognizing somebody who's transgender as their gender that they want to be recognized as, because when they've actually transitioned, they are that gender. Like, they've taken the fucking hormones, they've gotten their junk changed, they are that gender now. And that's where I'm like, I don't have a problem, because when you see them, they are that gender. It's not even an issue of like misgendering you. If you look at that person and recognize what you see, and they had a successful transition, they are that gender now. So I don't have like, my issue is not that. It's when people who want to cross-dress and then call themselves transgender and then make an issue about transgender rights when they're actually just cross-dressing. It's like fucking with transgender rights, because then those people become ammo against actual transgender people.
And to go back to your very solid point about, can I fuck this thing?
Yep.
And I don't mean to reduce people to things, but that's how they sit, right?
That's exactly the issue.
Like 99% of the time, and it's usually white heterosexual men, and I'm going to say it, among the humans, why are you over sexualizing trans? There's more than, and gender, that's before we even get in the bloody thing of gender is the construct, sex is the biology. Talk to any academic, sociologist, anthropologist, biologist, they all agree sex is the biology, gender is the culture. It is an arbitrary thing. There are several genders in different cultures, at time immemorial. They blend, they mold, they change. But like this whole very strange hypersexual, all that transgender people want to do in their eyes is trick people to having sex. And I'm like, really, have you ever, and it's inside versus outside. Like how quickly you're around certain groups of humans that you know of a certain thing. Like Jewish humans will tell jokes amongst themselves that are different than outsiders, and then trans folks, when you know, like you don't the way you speak, the way you have never ever met a transgendered human, and it really bloody shows. Your lack of...
and they've also never considered that women don't want to be the object of the male gaze as their goal in life. And that's like, again, it gets back to, can I have sex with it? And further, it wants me to have sex with it. That's like this like...
It's a strange way to live, isn't it?
Very strange approach.
I once heard a human say very wisely, I can appreciate the flower and not want to fuck the flower. And I'm like, that's brilliant. And now I've got to air that for her. It was a very brilliant saying.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Humans seem to like narrow it down. Sex, or can I control it? Goblins, maybe that's why goblins are so sympathetic.
We don't want to be controlled by the concept of a butterfly collection.
What's that?
A collection of butterflies, pinned to a fiber board, encased in a picture frame behind glass.
That's very Victorian of you.
It's like, I really like this butterfly. Let me catch it with this net, and then I'm going to very carefully place it on this foam board and then pin it down with the needles.
I can only appreciate nature by subjugating it.
Yeah.
But that's a terribly ugly British way of viewing the world, even though that's the land of, well, my ancestors, so to speak, even though we're a different species. That's my island. And watch them colonize and subjugate everything. I'm just like, I myself was brought over on a boat. Well, I don't want to get into that story.
We had to do a bug collection in 7th grade, and I remember being horrified at the concept of like subjugating other insect species in such a way for a grade when we have examples in books and shit. But then it's
like what do American schools do? The fetal pig.
Yeah.
Do they do that one too? Unless you're getting into.
I don't know if they do that anymore. It's so much like we did worms and then.
Man, there's so many just abject failures within our education system. You know, there was a few years ago there was a story about a class that got taken to a cotton plantation, and they were given bags and told to pick fucking cotton.
Yeah.
And then one kid's like, "Cool, I got this bag of cotton," but he found out he had to turn it in, so he put a bunch of cotton in his pants. Into his pocket because he was going to take it home because he worked hard for that cotton. So he gets home.
The layers of this story is astounding to me.
His mother is like, "Oh, by the way, he's black." And so he gets home and his mom's like, "What's this cotton doing in your pants? Did you steal this?" He's like, "No, Mom, they took us to a cotton plantation and I picked cotton." And so apparently she freaked out and sued the school board.
So they're still doing awful things like a plantation. Even the word makes goblins shudder because the word carries power, right? Like we even feel it, and we're not the same species, and we feel the power of that word, like plantation. And people will still try to think, "Oh, we're going to do an event on a plantation."
Sure, right, yeah.
I was like, humans were bloody held as property there. They were beaten, raped, and killed.
A plantation
as well as
is the
worked to
oppressor's
death.
word for a farm.
Yeah, like, why don't you just say it's a bloody farm, if it's a farm? Now, if you are a historical guide and you say, on this plantation, horrible things happen, by all means, use the word plantation. Just like if you're a guide at an awful place like any of the former concentration camps, you're going to call it a concentration camp, right? Because it's proper nomenclature, but don't pretend that's not what it wasn't. Don't give it a connotation. It's like plantations were awful places.
Have our wedding here.
Yeah, like, here, have your concert here. Like, what? That's
Please
plain-
come to vacation on our sunny plantation in beautiful Georgia, built on the backs of slaves.
Well, even
I mean, really, that's like...
the slow, inexorable progress of acknowledging slavery. If you go, there are buildings, I believe they are in Liverpool, that were built by slaves. And they have memorialized on the plaques, I don't remember the exact wordings, but basically a sort of public apology. These buildings were built by the blood of slaves.
I saw
Sort of moment.
I saw a picture of a group of young African-American women standing at the site of a plantation that all of their descendants used to work. And lo and behold, they're all in medical school.
Yeah.
Now that's quite beautiful image. Or on the flip side of that coin, you ever see people taking selfies at like concentration camps in Germany?
Yeah, that's just
like this really incredibly distasteful and awful, terrible.
Well, it's shit like that that makes me think ghosts are just bullshit.
Because they come out and like, yeah, right?
So if you have like a bunch of slave ghosts that aren't haunting people who are fucking
Yeah, no doubt.
taking pictures and having weddings at their fucking plantation, the ghosts aren't real.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You have like,
up,
what's that American film, The Candyman moment?
Yeah.
Like, a wonderfully righteous ghost comes in like, I don't have any sympathy for you. You had that.
There are so many places that nobody can go if ghosts are real.
Right, yeah.
Like every battleground, every place that's been like stricken where plague was brought to them, like all of these places you just can't go because there's someone there that's so mad that they're gonna haunt the shit out of
The other thing about seeing humans be so incredibly tone deaf, it's like, they say, "Oh, I didn't mean it, I was well intended." How could you have been? You did something, the lack of common sense in the brain.
Yeah.
It's like, how does this happen?
Well, maybe there's, it occurred to me, maybe there's some kind of rationalization that the only people who will be tormented for all eternity are the white people, and that's why you don't see slave ghosts because they're automatically sent through. They're given an express pass to heaven.
They've actually truly went to they truly have went to a better
They
place.
don't have to suffer again.
Yeah, there's no more of this shit. We're only
That's actually a just God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the bloody best argument about ghosts I've ever seen, is that they don't exist because of this, right?
But they only exist for a certain group of really horrible people that are all apparently white. That's fucked up. Why would any culture create that kind of mythology? That's like so fucked up. I mean, how self-loathing do you have to be to create that? I mean, and I know that like Japanese culture or Asian culture, there are ghosts. Mm-hmm. There are ghosts.
What's the term in Japanese? Gaki, ghost, right? Is it also in Chinese, right?
And so, I think the translation is just ghost.
Ghost
or spirit, but like they, when people in like Chinese ghost stories are haunted, it's because they did some fucked up shit, like push their wife into a well.
Well, I believe that's the same cultural mechanism for Japanese ghost stories. Is that it's a product of something horrible happening. I mean, the beautiful retelling of Kurosawa did one of the Shakespearean plays, Throne of Blood.
Yeah, that's
it's a retelling, and it's Macbeth. Actually, I believe it's Macbeth, right?
Macbeth, yeah.
It's so integrated into Japanese culture, like, because the mechanisms were there of a ghost story and their cultural underpinnings connected. And it's like, yeah, you're right. It's like something horrible happens that gives birth to a ghost. It's not just some random spirit running around.
Right.
So maybe it's just a reflection of a culture not wanting to create a story about a foreign culture that they don't know enough about to write those stories. And so we don't see ghost stories coming from African culture because they've got a whole different culture of spirits that functions differently and has different properties and different rules. And then, of course, there's the whole, like, wiping the fucking cultural memory out when slaves were brought to America.
What's the difference between ancestor worship and ghosts? Because, again, it's like the function is different in that, like...
That's what I mean.
There's a more direct connection, and it's not like
that's what I mean is that for a different culture to create some kind of spiritual connection, some kind of spiritual body to attempt to communicate with or to tell stories about, to romanticize, to create mythology about, a mythos, they're going to have a different set of rules. That's why Western magic and Eastern magic don't really work well together. That's why they have different zodiacs. That's why there are all these variations on the theme that exist and can kind of coexist when we create these wrappers to explain them. But even the best container can only present so much, and then you still have to dive in and learn more about it to make everything else make sense.
No, and you just hit on something that my little small epiphany about human beings is geography affects culture and religion. Not just culture, obviously, affects religion, right?
Except for drum and bass, which kind of happened all over the planet all at once.
Two examples that really prominently come to my mind is that, see, you take Scotland, for example. There's a disproportionate number of myths and folklore that revolve around creatures, selkies, water horses, things that will drown you, right? I don't know how much you know about Scottish lochs. They were caused by glacial slides, and they can go from being 2 to 3 feet deep, and you take another step, and it's literally can be 100 feet deep in the blink of an eye. Stories told to keep Scottish children from wandering down to the loch and drowning. Cautionary tales that become culturally enshrined. I've noticed that monotheism comes out of deserts. It doesn't come out of other cultures geographically. It seems, you hear of a monotheist, not native, right? Like it's a desert-born religion. The Zoroastrians, which are the precursor to the Christians. And there's a thing that you want to see Christians get angry, mention Zoroastrians. It just blows their minds. No, wait, no, you're not the first monotheist on the planet. But they come from these very harsh environments, like monotheism. And I'm sure books have been written, and I need to find them written by humans about why.
If you're occupying a harsh-ass environment, you can't have multiple gods that might
disagree. No room for
they might disagree with each other, and you can't have that. You have to have a unified.
You have to have a unifying factor.
Yeah.
Well, but this gets back to those religions as a transmission of cultural safety guards to prevent, like, whether it's theft
Yeah.
fucking.
Well, it should be a delivery mechanism for ethics and morality stories.
Yeah, I
It
mean,
should
or
be.
even cooking mechanisms. 'cause
Sure,
that's
it should
just
be.
down
Well,
to, like-
eating the wrong foods could kill you,
Right.
obviously,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
it is definitely a safety mechanism, and it's interesting that here we are, that like Europeans, humans of European descent, weren't monotheist culturally for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were, quote, pagans longer than they've ever been Christian.
Yeah.
And then you had basically the Nordic, the Vikings were the last holdout among white Europeans to be Christian, and they act very different. I don't know if you've noticed, and I know you've traveled abroad. When you look at Europeans that were the last holdouts, that they were oral cultures before they became Christianized and written cultures, they act very different than their European cousins, because they still have that in them a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, like Vikings, for example, they were socialists.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and you look at modern day Norwegians, for example, they're socialist. It's easy.
Well-
the transition was easy for
People
them.
want to romanticize Vikings as the warriors.
Oh, I'm not
only.
saying that they're
But they're-
romantic, but the way
But
they...
no. I mean, the mythology.
That's the only thing that gets romanticized about
That's
them.
the thing that gets romanticized. They don't want to talk about the trade networks.
Oh, I see.
They don't
I
want to talk
understand.
about the actual culture of Vikings or the type of clothes that normal men wore or the kinds of things that normal people actually did, because commerce was a thing. They had
they had to have farmers.
Yeah,
and
they had
shit,
farmers.
Yeah,
They had
the bulk
light
of Vikings were
industry.
actually bloody farmers.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
thing. People want to romanticize this. Everyone was a Viking warrior that was always out, going and fighting. But if everyone did that, everyone dies.
Well,
because that's how fighting
to even
works.
go further with that, like the idea of raiding into the eastern seaboard of England and Scotland was to get farmable land.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they weren't necessarily looking for golden treasures all the time. They were looking for land to settle and stay.
I'm sure that it has as much to do with that as it does like people being pissed off at each other and not wanting to have to see the next group over at the next spring gathering.
Yeah, that made me think of another thing. A thing that Vikings did was fight Christians. They spent most of their time fighting white European Christians. Like the Christians would go and destroy one of their cairns or some holy site to the Vikings. Of course, the Vikings would get angry, retaliate, and then the Christians would act like, oh, they've assaulted our monastery. I was like, you destroyed their holy site. They're not a calm people.
What makes the whole romanticization of Viking culture so much more interesting is that like the whole Neil Gaiman wrote this really fascinating like expository about the Viking and Norse mythology, and there is an intact Norse mythology, but the version of it that most people have read is a translation of Christianity that was rewritten using Norse characters. And
it's imposed. Yeah,
it's a superposition of Norse mythology over Christianity to teach to embed Christian ideology into Nordic countries, and so you actually have to do a lot more research to realize the connections and then break through these little like mind traps.
No, and I think
That's kind of interesting because so much of what we're presented as, this is the latest craze of historical intrigue that everyone's going to be talking about. It's always going to be packaged in a way that can be consumed, and it's always going to be framed in a way that can be repackaged and create some kind of consumer cycle to wield the machine, to make the machine work, because somebody's got to make some money off of this. Because if it was truly about information and being nerdly, then it would be as simple as allowing the viral mechanisms of our internet to disseminate information to say, hey, check this out, this is really cool. But instead it's intercepted by actors on the internet whose interest is to make money. And we've talked about this before, where if your goal is to make money, then your goal really isn't about what you're doing. And it's a trap that people get caught up in, because we want money, we want to make money, we want to find a way to do what we love and to get paid for it. But at the same time, like there's that threshold where it's not about what you're doing, it's definitely about making money. And that's where the compromises happen. And so we can't fault people for the decisions that they make in a given moment, because there are all these factors that nobody gets to see. But
at some point it's about making money. So, who's making money off Viking lore?
Probably a bunch of slave labor owners in China making little plastic bits of
them,
and
but
it's awful. It's like you've reduced a culture, and any culture, and it's like one that the package that you're selling isn't accurate, right? It's not the culture that it is, but you're exploiting slave labor to get a product that is inaccurate out to the masses, and it's
Well, that's also a reflection of the company that went to China that said, we want you to manufacture this product.
yeah, and that's where exactly I'm going, right? It's this
So-
awful company that's decided to predicate this
it's-
product on a falsehood in the beginning.
At that point, it's about a bottom line mentality, keeping a machine running.
Mm-hmm.
That's the dilemma. They don't have to have a bottom line mentality.
well, and I also wonder how many of these myths are created around money laundering rings, where I mean it's like the same thing with art circles. In
Yeah,
that,
all of those art auction houses.
right. They're just
You just sold
money.
that painting for how many millions of pounds?
Or that banana.
The fucking banana that
That's clearly money laundering.
some other guy
It's clearly
ate
money
later.
laundering.
It is like, oh, you can just put a different banana up there. Oh, if the tape fails, here's a roll of duct
Yeah.
tape. It's not even special duct tape. The banana was purchased at some like specific outdoor market, but it's not a special banana. And then it gets better. After that, I saw a picture of some guy in like Armenia or something like that put a fucking sausage on the wall and duct taped it to the wall.
I mean, but it didn't. No money was trying to be laundered, so it wasn't worth anything.
Exactly.
So that's what
Yeah.
when
Wow.
people are like upset that the $120,000 banana was worth. It wasn't worth anything. You just watched money laundering happen in front of your face.
assigned value. It was
Yeah.
not like, I mean, technically, if you want to get into it, many things are just assigned value.
Oh yeah,
Commerce. This is why goblins are basically bloody socialist. I mean, we're watching humans in stage capitalism, and we're like, we don't know if we should bring popcorn or we should
Well,
cry or a little bit of
My
both.
understanding is that goblins live in gold mines.
Oh no, I wish we did.
That's no
well,
longer
we'd
the
be out
case
more out in
anymore.
the coal mines. Where did that one come from? I'll have to look into that. Coal mines.
Yeah.
Maybe I should talk to my wayward cousins about coal
They're,
mines.
they're not telling you. They're keeping something from you. man.
Maybe coal mines.
is that the
Yeah.
difference between them and the elves? The goblins have the gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the elves are taller and are less green and black than we are. They always get all the glory, especially going back to Nordic myths. Oh, elves are the golden children.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not everyone can have beautiful hair and skin and look like they've got like perfect makeup all the time.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure how that's possible. Some people though, they've got that like weird like. They look like they just came out of makeup, and they've got perfect lighting following them around everywhere they go.
It's like they got their own personal theme music behind
Exactly.
them.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's how I always tell on Twitter that I need a personal biographer and I need theme music 24/7. I need these things. And that's, going back to the whole Nordic thing, we were talking about the archetype of Loki.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody thinks that Loki is Tom Hiddleston from the
Right.
From the
yeah,
films.
that's what everybody.
Well, that's the Asgardian is the Marvel iteration of the mythology. You go back to the real Loki. Yeah, Loki can be a bastard, but the idea of Loki, and it's a very Jungian thing, right? To borrow the human psychologist, like what do they call it? Archetypes, right? Like that. Many cultures that are supposedly disconnected have a Loki personality. I love Anansi. He is an African Loki as far as my limited understanding of what I've read of Anansi as far as source documents. Not like that he's this beautiful
Basically.
trickster god that gets you to the right place. He may seem like he's a complete arse as he's doing it, but he's getting you where you need to be. And that makes me angry too that Orlando Jones will not be playing him. I thought that was a brilliant American Gods was a brilliant human show. And then Orlando Jones says he's basically fired.
Yeah, that was interesting that they fired him of all people.
Yeah, my favorite Orlando Jones movie is Evolution.
That was a good
He's a brilliant human. And he's one of those that
He's like super funny.
he's an incredibly talented human. And it's like, well, if more of you existed, maybe more goblins would come out of the woodwork.
Yeah. The reason I like that movie is because
puts him against pits him with David Duchovny, who's like Mr. like straight laced, like just deadpan.
What was that bloody movie in the 1980s? A seminal Brother from Another Planet. I think it was one of Orlando Jones. Was he in that? I'm gonna have to use the Google here to find that. Yeah, it was from the early 80s, I believe.
Oh yeah.
I was very young.
Yeah. I think I
Goblins have been around for a very long time. We watch everything that humans do.
Brother from Another Planet.
Yeah, and he plays an alien. Fucking super weird. Like, he's basically like Black Nerds.
Yeah.
In the 80s.
Now, it's been a long time since I've seen it, right? But,
that's so funny that in the 80s, it was so ubiquitous that if you were black, you were like street. That a black nerd is basically an alien.
What was that? What was that really strange show that was like the 80s that American television did? That's Steve Urkel, right? Like,
Family Matters.
Oh,
the other complaint I had about America in
that show, the first season, there were two sisters. Like, there was a younger sister, but then like somewhere along the way, like the second or third season,
and never came back.
No, they didn't even. It wasn't even that. They just like
wrote her right out of the bloody show.
They just stopped talking about her. They never mentioned her. And then years later, it turns out that she was in some like amateur porn video, taking it in the butt.
Does it happen a lot?
That's what happens when you get kicked out of the family. You end up doing porn.
Wow, is that like a recurring theme in American television then? That's astounding.
Well, I feel like that's how the porn industry is sustained, isn't it?
Did she actually get in porn, or was that just a rumor?
I think it was a rumor.
Because that's one of
those things. Like I don't actually
like
care enough to.
Legend.
Well, I'm not really interested enough in finding out,
right.
but it's enough to hear the rumor that I find it.
It remind him to delete his browser history when he goes to find out.
It's like Marilyn Manson never actually had his ribs removed.
Oh, I used to hear that.
Nobody ever actually saw it, and nobody got paid for it.
Is there physical proof of this? I don't want to know.
Well, they're just, hey man, it's like it's like all those deep seedy pockets of the internet that like nobody actually knows about unless they go into them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm constantly reminding people on Twitter that the coincidence, which I don't think it's a coincidence, of there's a type. They're not really goblins, but we call them redcaps, right? The old folklore that they dye the tops of their heads with the blood of the people that they've killed and cannibalized. Mm. And I remember a meme that I had made, and it's not taken off yet. It needs to go totally viral, of a redcap next to Trump with a red hat, and I simply say coincidence. And there you go.
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Radio is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Castle in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 1 and 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And thanks again for listening. Exceptional Radio. KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org.